Hello everyone and welcome to our NZGBC Plugged In, a monthly lunchtime webinar series brought to you by the New Zealand Green Building Council. This webinar series aims to bring you ideas, insight and innovation for better buildings in New Zealand. So this month, today, myself, Andrea Davison and my colleague Sam Archer will be giving you a heads up on a scoping paper that we're looking to release next month with some ideas as to what Green Star might look like in the near future. So just for some technical things to start with, so we will answer some questions. We'll actually answer them at an interim point at about halfway through and then at the end of the webinar. Please do type your questions into the question box rather than the chat box. We will receive your questions. It's just that we will wait to answer them until a midway point. And you can type questions into that question box at any point through the presentation. Oops. So what we're talking about today, the next step in green buildings. And as I said, it's both myself, Andrea Davison. I look after Green Star here at the New Zealand Green Building Council and looking at when we review the tool and launch new tools to the New Zealand market. And then Sam looks after all of our rating tools, so including Homestar and Neighbours NZ as well. And he'll be speaking towards the end of the webinar today. So to start with, I'll just start with, what is it that we're doing currently? What have we been up to for the last 10 years since Green Star was launched in New Zealand in 2007? We have now over 140 projects that have achieved certification. And you'll see here some statistics around, how many 4-star, 5-star and 6-star ratings we have and what type of projects they are. And I'm just going to quickly say here that I'm assuming that most of our audience today is somewhat knowledgeable about what we do at the Green Building Council and may have some previous knowledge of Green Star, but do feel free to ask questions if there's anything that's unclear. So what does this look like if we go back, to when we first launched Green Star in New Zealand? We had a design rating available just for office projects, and these were the first certifications that were achieved. And so the tool initially in New Zealand was set up, it worked really well for the kind of speculative office market where they could achieve a design rating and attract tenants based on what they had achieved in that design rating. And just to note here on the left-hand side, 33 Custom House Quay has now gone and achieved a 6-star Neighbours NZ rating, which really shows the kind of follow through, when we design buildings and construct them well, we set them up for success in their operational phase. So Neighbours NZ looks at the energy performance in the operational phase of our buildings. In 2009, we introduced criteria that could be used for education and industrial projects and office interiors. So this was the first Green Star certified education building for the University of Canterbury. Also, there was a lot happening in kind of late 2009. We also had the first project that achieved both a design and an as-built rating. So in 2008, the original office tool was kind of expanded to include the opportunity to rate at the as-built stage. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a real kind of progression from buildings doing the design rating to now doing the built rating, either by itself or in combination with the design rating. So it's the same criteria within the Green Star tool. It's just a different set of documentation used to demonstrate compliance with the tool. So a more kind of robust certification and that it's using as-built documentation. We also had the first Green Star certified industrial building in August 2009, which is the Career Post building. Also in 2009, the first Green Star interiors rating for the NZI interiors. And we also that year received, had the first 6 Green Star rated office building which was the geyser building in Parnell. And then in 2013, we had the first 6-star, what we call trifecta. So they achieved a 6-star design rating, 6-star AsBuilt rating, and a 6-star interiors rating. And that was the Christchurch City Council building. Then in February 2014, we hit a significant milestone, which was where we had our 100th project certified. We actually had 3 certify as our 100th projects. One of these was the Te Whare Whenua Te Murumuru in Kawakawa, Northland. And this is a really impressive building in that it was the first to achieve, it was not only the 100th, but it was also the first to achieve a 6 Green Star education rating. And it also went on to win the Supreme Award at the World Green Building Council for the Asia Pacific region in that year. So a really significant building, yet a very small, very well-designed building. Also, so the other 2 projects that achieved the 100th certification, one was the Forte Health building, which is a private hospital in Christchurch. And this was actually the first custom tool certified. So when we've had projects that are not either an office, education, industrial, or office interiors project, what we have done for those projects to date is that we have essentially taken the criteria within the most kind of relevant tool, and we've modified it or adapted it for that typology. And Forte Health was the first where we developed the custom tool, and then that project certified using that custom tool. So a pretty significant milestone at this point. And from this point onwards, we have had increasing interest from other types of buildings to be able to achieve Green Star certifications. And then the third 100th project was the Sharp Tū Hope building in Tauranga. So a really good example of how Green Star is kind of reaching the regions of New Zealand. So from this point, you know, we kind of got to a pretty important milestone with 100 projects. And it was soon after this that we went out to the New Zealand market to ask them, you know, ask you, what do you want? What should we be doing as an organisation? But also, what should we be doing in terms of our rating tools? And with regards to our rating tools, one of the things that came out of that strategic review was that there really was a desire to be able to more easily rate a wider range of building typologies, and also that we should start to look at community and precinct types of projects, and also have something available to look more at the performance of existing buildings. So I do recommend that you go to our website and have a read of this. It's a really well-written document which gives some insights as to what the New Zealand market was looking for from us at that time. So from this point, we developed a rating tool strategy that was approved by the board. And what that strategy looked like was essentially to have a more complete suite of Green Star rating tools. So this to include Green Star Communities, Green Star Performance, which is for existing buildings, and a more comprehensive rating tool for new builds, which can rate all kinds of projects. So we have actually already launched Green Star Communities. So version 1.1 was released for use with New Zealand guidance in it in September 2016. Green Star Performance we launched in November last year. So we do now have a rating tool available to look holistically at existing buildings through their kind of operational and maintenance phase. And then what we're looking at doing now is we're looking at Green Star Design AsBuilt, which is a rating tool that can cover all types of projects. So one thing to note here is that these tools are currently being used in Australia. Essentially what we did 10 years ago in 2007 is that we took what was a Green Star which was a rating tool developed by the Green Building Council of Australia. We took it, adapted it for New Zealand, and then released it to the New Zealand market as a New Zealand tool. So that's where our original office, education, industrial, those were all our tools, just for use in New Zealand. What we're looking at doing now is essentially looking at the Australian developed Design and AsBuilt tool, still making those adaptations that are necessary for New Zealand, but essentially having one tool, one submission guidelines or technical manual, which has mostly common criteria, but which also provides, where necessary, separate pathways for Australian projects and New Zealand projects. So this is actually what we've already done for the communities and performance tools. Those were both quite new tools for the New Zealand market. So if you are looking at those tools, you'll see within them that there are specific guidance pathways for New Zealand. So the next step is to look at the Design and AsBuilt tool and how we can make the same adaptation for New Zealand. What this also means going forward is that we're looking to do tool review and industry engagement activities in alignment with the Green Building Council of Australia. So going forward, there'll be more regular engagement activities and tool review processes that will be in line, given the fact that we have aligned kind of Australasian rating tools going forwards. So what this means in terms of what the tools look like, or the numbering, just so that I know that some of you do work closely with Green Star, just so that you're clear. So when a major tool is released, it would be version 1.0. After a year, there'd be a minor review and release, which is 1.1, and then a year later, again 1.2, so that the tools are being regularly updated on an annual basis. And then there is a major tool review and kind of new version released approximately every 3 years. So just something to note here is that at the moment we're kind of jumping on board with what the current Australian version of the tools is. So for communities, it's 1.1. Green Star Performance, the 1.2 version that was released in November, has the Australian and New Zealand pathways in it. And then the current version of Design and AsBuilt in Australia is at 1.2. So it is due for kind of one of these more major reviews. And when a major review takes place, it's approximately kind of 18 months of a review period to allow enough time for industry engagement and feedback and workshops and that kind of thing. So the next major release of Design and AsBuilt, which would be version 2.0, is scheduled for mid-2019. So as I said, we've done the communities tool, the performance tool, kind of in line with the Green Building Council of Australia. The next activity that we'll be doing that is in alignment with them at the same time is that both of our organisations will be releasing a scoping paper in March of this year. And this essentially is to start the process towards, what does the next latest, greatest, next version of Green Star look like. So in terms of a timeline, at the moment we're sitting here in March 2018. What we're working on right now at the moment is developing an addendum, so a New Zealand addendum to the current Design and AsBuilt tool. So in Australia, the version 1.2 does not have any New Zealand pathways written into it, but we have projects really interested in using that rating tool already because it allows certification of any kind of building typology. So what we're working on right now is developing a kind of addendum which will provide guidance for those projects to be able to use that tool immediately, and it will have any necessary changes that we need to make to allow for the New Zealand context and market. So that's what we're kind of calling phase one. And so to note here is that we are taking expressions of interest from projects who are in kind of early design stages that might have an interest in using the Design and AsBuilt tool and piloting that with us. So phase two is a more comprehensive review phase where we're looking at, what should Green Star look like going forward. The the proposed launch date for that tool is mid-2019. And this is where we would have a tool that would be completely in alignment with the Australian version. So essentially we'll be releasing an Australasian Green Star Design and AsBuilt, obviously with some New Zealand pathways incorporated to allow for New Zealand conditions. So that's what we're calling phase 2. And the scoping paper is essentially the start of that process. And just one thing to note here is that when there is a major release of a new tool, there's always quite a long overlap where we allow registrations using our current set of rating tools. So it wouldn't be until about mid-2020 that any new projects would be required to register under the new version of Design and AsBuilt. And so there's quite a long time frame before projects are having to use the new criteria. So we really are trying to right now set the scene for what Green Star should look like, you know, 2019, 2020 and beyond. So in a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, the scoping paper we will be releasing for industry comment next month. We'd also like to hear from anyone who's interested in participating in working groups, and I'll talk about that with the next slide. We would like feedback on the scoping paper by mid-April. And then concurrently, we are developing the New Zealand pathways, an addendum to the current Design and AsBuilt, and also interiors tools. And we are accepting currently pilot projects to use the Design and AsBuilt and interiors tools. And in here, I'm just going to quickly note that I should have mentioned Green Star Interiors, which is the fourth and final kind of Green Star tool that's part of the suite. And the Australian Green Star Interiors tool is able to rate any kind of interiors project, not just office interiors. So that would include, you know, retail and hospitality and that kind of thing. So we're also going to be launching a kind of updated Australasian version of that tool at the same time as Design and AsBuilt. So we also welcome interest in if you have projects, again, that are in early design that might be interested in using that tool. In May, we're planning to have some kind of market briefings and workshops in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. We would really love to have your participation, your feedback on what is being proposed. And we'll release a more complete kind of consultation paper in July. At the moment, the scoping paper is kind of a high-level document. We'll be getting into more detail towards the middle of the year with that consultation paper. And then there's likely to be a release of kind of, I guess, kind of draft rating tools for public comment towards the end of the year. And then into 2019 will be the kind of approvals process and rating tool launch. So how we're structuring the development of these tools, we do have a Green Star NZ steering group. And we also have representation on the Green Building Council of Australia's Technical Advisory Group, and that's Sam Archer from NZGBC represents New Zealand on that Australian advisory group. And then on the GBCA Industry Advisory Group, we have New Zealand represented through Simon Wilson of RDT Pacific. So they both sit on the New Zealand steering group, and then we have one representative each of these subgroups that we're looking to establish. So we already have those representatives on that steering group, but what we are interested in is if you or yourself or somebody that you know you think would be really useful to participate in these subgroups, we'd love to hear from you. So we're suggesting that these are particular areas of concern for New Zealand, or where we would like to make sure that we are adequately adapting the tools and making sure that they're well suited to the New Zealand market. So we have one which is around energy and carbon, recognising that there are vast differences between Australia and New Zealand in terms of our electrical grid and those kind of topics. And we have subgroup 2, which is around products and materials, New Zealand supply chain and construction demolition waste. So relating to making sure that New Zealand industry is well represented from that point of view. We're also really interested in small projects for New Zealand. We've had a lot of small projects doing Green Star. and we want to make sure that, given the number of small projects being constructed in New Zealand, that we try to make Green Star as accessible as possible to those scale of projects. And then we also have a group which will be representing Green Star clients and users. So this is to make sure that we are keeping on board those who have been real supporters of the Green Star tools to date and use them regularly on their projects to make sure any concerns they might have are addressed. And also, potential, not acknowledging that the tool, can certify any kind of building, to look at, who are also the potential users of the tool going forward. So at this point, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to ask any questions with relation to the process. And after this point, Sam is going to take over and he's going to talk through a little bit more in terms of the detail as to what is in the scoping paper that we're about to release and what are the kind of a heads up on the kind of questions we're going to be asking you.
Great. So this is Sam Archer, also from NZGBC. I'm going to be answering some of the questions that have already come through. So we've had some good questions. Marcus Baker has asked a couple of questions, one about Green Star performance and neighbours, and asking really what's the difference between the two. So in New Zealand currently, neighbours only deals with energy. So it's purely around the operational energy performance of office buildings. Whereas Green Star performances are more holistic. I mean, if you think of Green Star covering all the different types of sustainability topics like energy, water, waste, indoor air quality, ecology, all those kind of ideas. So Green Star performance is more holistic than neighbours. Currently, I think it's really important to get across that neighbours is able to be slotted into Green Star performance. So if you've done a neighbours rating for a building, then we can use that neighbours rating to judge the energy part of Green Star performance. The second question is, why is water efficiency excluded from neighbours NZ? This is really around, in Australia, neighbours is able to deal with energy, water, indoor air quality, and one other, I think, waste. Neighbours was brought in by ECA into New Zealand, and ECA only decided to bring in the energy part. They haven't licensed all of the other parts of neighbours from Australia. I mean, I think personally it would be great if they did, but really it's not on the table at the moment. Ben Masters, you've asked about the Green Star Interiors tool. It's always the kind of poor cousin, isn't it? It shouldn't be, but it happens to be the poor cousin currently. But yeah, as Andrea has said, definitely we will be introducing the Australian Green Star Interiors tool. That, as Andrea says, means that you can rate any type of interior, not just office interiors. So we'll be doing that. And Andrea talked about that phase 1 and phase 2. In phase 1, so with the addendum that we're doing in a couple of months' time, that will be both new build and interiors. And then finally, Nat Warmington has asked, can you circulate some of the slides notes from the webinar, specifically around circulating the timelines for the future development of Green Star? I think that'd be fine. We're happy to circulate those timeline slides, so we'll get that done afterwards.
And also this webinar will be available on our website, so it will be available to members afterwards.
Yeah. For payment, though, I think this time.
No, not for members. Members.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay. Good. So look, any more questions, anyone? Right, going, gone. Right, we'll continue. Excellent. So I think Andrea has taken us very well through the sort of process for our introduction of design and as-built. And just to recap, there's this phase 1 where in the next couple of months we'll be releasing this addendum paper, which is a kind of patch, if you like, for the current Australian design and as-built, meaning that projects can register now for design and as-built. But Australia is really doing a scoping paper around the future of Green Star and what it's going to look like. So what is the next big stage for Green Star? And so I'm going to talk just briefly through at a high level what Australia is proposing, and therefore what we're proposing, to give you the opportunity to A, ask questions, and B, prepare for the scoping paper that's come out that you can respond to. So I think it's worth saying, as Andrew's already mentioned, that the big advantage of design as-built is it can rate any type of building, not office, industrial, or education. But we think there are a whole load of other improvements that that Australia has been brought to Green Star. So I'm just going to sort of summarise what we think those are. The first one is that there's now a mandatory built rating under the Australian scheme, and we will be doing the same. And that means instead of having a separate certification agreement for design and a separate certification agreement for the built rating, there will be one certification agreement that will allow you to do what is called a design review rating. That's broadly the same as our current design rating, but I suppose it's just currently, you know, it's wrapped into the contract. And then as we do currently, that will expire after 2 years if you don't get a built rating. But it is all, you know, wound into one contract. As I've already said, any type of building is eligible for design as built. From our perspective, and I'm sure from a lot of your perspectives, one thing that I think is really great about the tool is that there are no weightings. So 1 point in the tool is worth 1 point, end of. So it's pretty clear. I think the weightings have been a sort of source of confusion for a lot of projects. Oh, and actually, just while I talk about weightings, I think it's worth saying that you know, we're in current discussion with Australia about weightings more generally, because when Green Star was introduced into the New Zealand market in 2007, there was a very conscious decision to make the weighting slightly different from Australia in order to emphasise things that we felt were more important. So, for example, water is quite heavily weighted in Australia, and it's less weighted in New Zealand because water is seen as being less of a problem here. I think it's worth, well, I don't think we've reached a conclusion yet, but I'd be very keen to hear from people about their views on whether we should weight more heavily certain things in New Zealand as to, or others, or whether we should just say, well, you know what, the three really big categories in Green Star, so energy, water, and indoor air quality, are the most heavily weighted, and actually we should just follow Australia's example. And then the current design as-built tool in Australia has some new credits within it. I won't go into sort of great detail about what those are, but there is definitely the sense that the new tool is much more at the cutting edge of sustainable design. So I don't, Andrew, you want to summarise? Can you remember what those credits are?
So some of the things we've introduced to the New Zealand market through innovation challenges. So life cycle assessment is one pathway. You can still do a prescriptive approach to materials, but life cycle assessment is included within the main body of the tool, as is climate adaptation and resilience, as we've had as an innovation challenge as part of the tool.
Air tightness testing has been introduced as a point, so that's an interesting one. And again, we're in discussion with Australia. I think we're very forcefully making the point that air tightness testing is really not standard practice at all here for commercial buildings. And I think, again, I'd be very interested to hear from people about the availability of commercial climate air tightness testing rigs in New Zealand. Moving on, some of the benchmarks have been were increased under the when Australia released the design as-built tool in 2014. They very purposefully made the tool slightly tougher. I think there's always been that sense that Green Star needs to evolve over time and become tougher over time to reflect increasingly good sort of business as usual. So we need to be above business as usual. I think the Australian experience was the new design as-built tool was around half a star tougher than the old one, and so you know, it's likely that we would be following a similar trajectory. There are more performance-based pathways in the new tool. I think that's a really beneficial sort of new way. So you know, instead of having very sort of prescriptive tick box type approaches, you know, put this in your building, you get a point. It's more around if you're an expert and you can prove to us, for example, under transport, that you're going to get this improvement in mode share for away from cars, then you can prove that and sign it off. So there's more performance-based ways of demonstrating compliance. There are a number of Australian and New Zealand differences. I don't know if you want to summarise what.
So this is just where you know, we'll be you know, making sure that we do incorporate those changes where necessary. Yep. One example is obviously we have a seismic context to deal with here in New Zealand. So that's something that we are looking at incorporating. Again, we've had an innovation challenge available for low damage design as part of the project process, and we would look at integrating that.
Yeah. The new tool has got quite a bit of increased flexibility and documentation to be submitted. So currently within our tool, we say for a particular point that you must submit these 3 documents, and if you miss one of them out, the Green Star assessor will not award the point. In Australia, they now say these are the suggested documents, and then really it's up to the assessor to say, well, actually, you know, the submitted documentation really demonstrates the intent of the credit, so it's much more flexible. And what Australia has done is tried very hard to get some streamlining between the tools as you go from master planning, so the community, through to design as built, through to interiors, and then performance. So there's streamlining across those different tools. I think it's fair to say in some of the technical working groups I've been on that GBCA recognise there's still a lot of work to do to make that streamlining better. I think in particular there's recognition that performance is really quite different from the design as built tool, and so some desire to try and match up those tools in a much better way. And then finally, Australia introduced what they call volume assessment, and that's the idea that if you're an organisation that does a lot of cookie cutter type development, so say you do retail fit outs, or you know, every time you do a project it's very similar, you can submit your sort of standard ways of doing things at a desk level and say, this as a volume assessment, this is the way we always do things. And then that vastly reduces the amount of documentation you need for each project that's based on that volume assessment. So we'll be offering that as well in the New Zealand market. Okay, so the scoping paper that's going to be brought out is going to be talking about some of the developments, I suppose, in green building design and some of the emerging issues that are coming out. I think a big one is around health and well-being. I think there's a recognition that that's becoming more and more developers of buildings, I think particularly office buildings, want to show that their buildings are healthy, and so I think there's going to be increased focus on that within the tool. Resilience. So as Andrea said, the current design as-built tool has one credit around resilience and climate change adaptation. I think there's likely to be more emphasis on that. Positive. So already the Green Building Council of Australia have released a carbon neutral standard for buildings, and some innovation pathways for demonstrating that your buildings are carbon neutral. I think it's more than likely that 2019 issue of Green Star will start to insist on things like carbon neutrality for world leading, so 6-star buildings. That's really what they're itching towards. Just kind of racing through these. So people, so this is some of the stuff around sort of cultural sustainability and social sustainability. Again, it's going to be a big part of it. And then finally, natural environment. So much more emphasis on ecology and so on within the tools. So as I was saying, I think with the Paris Agreement coming up, we and Green Building Council of Australia really feel like there needs to be a greater focus on carbon emissions, and the Australians are saying that they're really being told that there needs to be a much bigger focus on ecology. And so the first slide here is really a question that will be put in the scoping paper: should mandatory minimum carbon emissions be introduced? So this is around the fact that, you know, within Green Star in New Zealand and in Australia, there are really very few mandatory points. And so there is this idea now that if you want to get a 4-star, 5-star, 6-star building, there will be or should be minimum carbon emission levels for buildings in order to even be awarded a 4, 5, 6-star building. So we would love to hear your views on that. And then similarly, should we introduce minimum requirements around increasing ecological value? So this is around, you know, making buildings more positive rather than just kind of less impact. And then there's this desire further to introduce mandatory minimums around some of the other credit areas. So again, I think we feel very strongly that you shouldn't be able to balance, say, increased energy performance against really not doing very well under indoor air quality. So you know, I think it's probably fair to say that if you're doing an interiors rating, there's probably a desire to see a minimum level of indoor air quality or indoor environment quality within that. So again, should we be introducing minimum requirements against the other areas of Green Star, not just energy and ecology. So the other area that Australia is talking about is mandatory performance ratings. So as Andrea said at the beginning of the slides, when we first started doing Green Star, it was really a focus on design ratings. And then people said, well, design ratings aren't good enough because once you get onto site, unless you're actually delivering what you said you do in design, then what's the point? So then we started moving on to built ratings, and the current tool is a mandatory built rating. Now, what's being said in Australia is, well, there's no point in delivering a built rating if ultimately the building's not performing in reality. The actual operational performance isn't good. I think a lot of that is around how the building's managed and how it's commissioned and how it's used and so on. But I think everyone feels that's really important. So the scoping paper is likely to say, unless you commit to getting a performance rating, or unless you get a performance rating for your building, your as-built rating will expire in the same way that we expire the design rating. So I think this is some of the final slides. So as I said, the scoping paper is coming soon, probably mid-March. We'll be releasing that. The feedback, I think it's probably a bit of a mistake actually. The feedback will be probably mid-April, so we'll be releasing the paper mid-March, and we'll give a month for feedback on the scoping paper. And please do let us know if you would be interested in being part of any of the tool development process, so any of the working groups, workshops, or please even just happy to take a call, or if you want to come into the office to discuss any ideas you've got for Green Star and how it could be improved. So moving on, questions.
So we do have a few questions here. So the first one is from Toto Buduk. So this is around, the adaptation of the Australian tools for New Zealand, and does that take into consideration cultural differences? And so at the moment, there's not a lot within Green Star around culture. There is an innovation challenge at the moment, which is around culture, heritage, and identity. It does have a little bit of a focus on heritage, protection of heritage buildings and conservation of those buildings. There is, in Australia, they have an innovation challenge around reconciliation. So it's definitely where we are headed with Green Star, and likely the next version, so Green Star 2019, will most likely have, criteria in there which is moving towards that kind of social, the social aspects of sustainability. Just one thing that might be of interest too is that so Green Star is used in South Africa as well as Australia and New Zealand, and some of these initiatives, or the need to include some of these social initiatives, has come out of the South African GBC as well. So there is a real interest in moving towards social sustainability as part of the suite of tools, certainly within Green Star communities.
Yeah, and if I could add a point to that, Andrea, I think one thing I didn't mention in terms of the advantages of us being much more streamlined with Australia is that, and Australia have acknowledged this, which I think is great, is that actually New Zealand has some things to offer Australia in terms of improving Green Star. And I think it's fair to say we all know that New Zealand does much better when it comes to kind of cultural engagement and so on. And so hopefully there will be some areas where we can teach the Australians a few things.
Another question from Tony Sanderson is around, the major difference between Australia and New Zealand being the seismic needs, and is there will any account be taken of buildings exceeding building code requirements? So at the moment we do have a innovation challenge that we developed in association with NZI, which does reward projects that undertake low damage design as part of their design process and do implement measures which are beyond building code. So it's certainly something that we do recognise already, and we would like to see kind of included within the tool. And also we would be interested, this is a slightly different topic, but with regards to Green Star performance, whether there is something that we can do in relation to the operation of existing buildings, and how do we deal with, we haven't quite addressed that yet, how do we deal with seismic resilience for our existing buildings? And so we are certainly very interested in expertise in that area if you'd like to participate in helping us to develop something there as well. We also have couple of questions from Adam Farmer, which is around air tightness. So he says air tightness is available, we can provide it. but there has been little call for it, and we'd like to see this change. So it's great to get that feedback. It's not something that's come up on our radar and in our conversations, and hence our I guess nervousness about kind of making it mandated immediately for projects wanting to use design and as-built immediately. But it's certainly something that we definitely want to engage with the industry on. You know, are we ready for that as a requirement going forward? And the other question you had was around the technical commissioning. So the air tightness is a part of the commissioning credit within Green Star Design and as-built. There is another question, from Rick Ranford. So does this now mean that a GSAP in New Zealand can be the GSAP on a job in Australia and vice versa? We're certainly looking to streamline our qualifications and education between Australia and New Zealand. At the moment, we already recognise Australian trained GSAPs for our projects here in New Zealand. And we're also looking at having access to it. We're working on getting access to some of the GBCA's webinars so that we have more educational content that we can provide to our professionals going forward as well. So we're definitely looking at kind of strengthening our relationship with the GBCA kind of on all fronts so that we can make the most of the resources that they are developing and vice versa.
I think it's probably fair to say that both organisations, GBCA and NZGBC, are looking to and would like the idea that qualifications are recognised on either side of the Tasman, but we're working on that.
And then another question from Ritva Vilpola. Understanding that Homestar is the New Zealand tool for residential buildings, will the integrated design and as-built tool be excluding residential ratings? And what opportunities are there for hotel projects? So we still see Homestar as the tool of choice for residential developments where they are essentially complete dwellings. So this can be individual standalone, terraced or apartments. When it comes to hotels, they're not kind of traditional dwellings, residential dwellings as such. And so a hotel would be a better fit with the design and as-built tool. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some grey areas with that. I mean, for example, we've been approached about a few student accommodation buildings, private student accommodation. I think our view is if there are definitely standalone dwellings within a big building, then those standalone dwellings should register on Homestar. If it's more like a sort of big building with lots and lots of little bedrooms that then have lots and lots of shared facilities, a bit more like a hotel or a boarding house, then probably Green Star is the tool to use.
And then the final question, which is more like a comment from Marcus Baker, which says mandatory carbon intensity for buildings is a very good idea. Strongly support this to help us actually move normal to where we need to be. Woohoo! So appreciate that feedback, and please do provide us feedback on that scoping paper. We would love to engage with you, and also if you have a particular expertise that you would like to help us develop or review criteria of a particular area, also very interested in hearing from you as well. So that is essentially the end of our webinar for today. The next one, which is up on the screen here, 28th of March, which will be on the topic of Hutt City Council thermal piles for ground source heating and cooling, which will be presented by Tony Sanderson from Stevenson and Turner. So we hope that you have enjoyed the webinar today. And as mentioned, please do, we really do look forward to getting your feedback and engaging with you through the tool review process.